A peaceful morning turns into a nightmare when a businessman closes his private pool. Screams erupt. The police are called, but no one suspects the horrifying secret about to surface from the watery depths. An old safe, a desperate letter, and a mysterious film reel. Don't miss what happens next. You won't believe your eyes. The Saturday morning sun, usually a welcome guest in the affluent, meticulously landscaped enclave of Viridian Palms, seemed to cast an accusing glare on Malik Johnson's property. At 38, Malik had cultivated a life that was the antithesis of the statistics often brandished about black men in America. His tech company, Innovate Solutions, was a quiet giant in the industry, and this sprawling villa, with its shimmering turquoise pool, was a testament to his relentless drive and ingenuity. It was also, increasingly, a source of unwelcome attention in a neighborhood that still viewed his presence as an anomaly, a disruption to their homogeneous comfort. Open this pool now, the shriek, high-pitched and laced with an unshakable conviction of entitlement, ripped through the serene morning air. Malik, dressed in workout shorts and a sweat-wicked tee from his home gym session, paused at his patio door, a sigh escaping his lips. Karen Wilkins, 55, a vision in a floral one-piece swimsuit that seemed 2 sizes too small and a wide-brimmed sun hat, was rattling the wrought iron gate that led to his pool area. Her face, a mask of indignant fury, was already flushed. Though it was barely 9 a.m., "This is a community, you hear me?" she continued, her voice escalating. "You can't just close things off. My grandchildren are visiting. They expect to swim." Malik stepped out onto the cool stone of his patio. "Morning, Karen," he said, his voice deliberately calm. He'd learned that any other tone was gasoline on her perpetually simmering fire. "The pool is closed for maintenance." "Maintenance?" she scoffed, her eyes, the color of faded denim, narrowing. "It was fine yesterday. I saw you in it. What did you do to it?" The implication, as always, hung heavy in the air that he, by his very nature, was prone to misuse or destruction. It was a familiar microaggression, one he'd learned to navigate with a weary patience. "There were some strange noises coming from the filtration system last night," Malik explained, keeping his tone even. "I'm having it checked out. Safety first. Wouldn't you agree?" Safety. Karen's laugh was brittle. "It's always something with you, isn't it? Some excuse to lord your things over everyone else?" She gestured vaguely at his house, his meticulously kept garden, the very air he breathed. This was a perfectly respectable neighborhood before he arrived. She didn't need to say it. Malik's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "The pool is on my private property, Karen. I have every right to close it for necessary repairs. I've already called a technician." "Technician on a Saturday," pull the other one. "You're doing this to be difficult, to ruin everyone's weekend." She punctuated her sentence by yanking on the gate again, the metal groaning in protest. "I pay my HOA fees." "I have rights. Your HOA fees contribute to the community amenities." "Karen, not my private pool," Malik said, the edge in his voice now unmistakable. He'd had enough of this charade. This wasn't about a pool, it was about control, about her discomfort with his success, his presence. The strange sounds had indeed been a concern. Late the previous evening, as he'd been doing his nightly check of the pool equipment, a habit born from a desire to maintain his property meticulously, he'd heard it a low, intermittent gurgling from the main drain. Almost like something was struggling beneath the surface. It wasn't the usual hum of the pump or the swish of the skimmers. It was deeper, more organic. He'd initially dismissed it as an airlock, but the sound had persisted, unsettling him. First thing this morning, he'd decided to shut the system down and call a specialist. Karen, however, was not one for rational explanations, especially when they thwarted her desires. "This is an outrage. You're disturbing the peace. You're creating a hostile environment." Malik watched as a few curtains twitched in the neighboring houses. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, a woman who usually offered a polite wave, was now peering through her blinds. Mr. Davies, 2 doors down, stepped onto his porch, ostensibly to collect his newspaper. But his gaze was fixed on the unfolding drama. This was Karen's specialty, turning private grievances into public spectacles. "I'm going to call the police," Karen declared. Fumbling for the phone tucked into the strap of her swimsuit, "This is harassment." "You're deliberately causing a nuisance," Malik folded his arms. "Be my guest, Karen. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your interpretation of property rights and nuisance laws." He knew his rights. He'd made damn sure of it when he moved into Viridian Palms. He'd seen the thinly veiled suspicion in some of the residents' eyes, heard the coded language. He was prepared. As Karen dramatically dialed, her voice rising in a performance of victimhood for any listening ears, Malik thought about the quiet satisfaction he usually derived from his home. It was his sanctuary, a place he'd built through years of battling prejudices and exceeding expectations. But neighbors like Karen Wilkins were a constant reminder that, for some, his very existence was an affront. The wail of a siren, approaching with a speed that suggested Karen had emphasized the hostile part of her complaint, sliced through the morning calm. Malik braced himself. He knew how this often played out. Two patrol officers, Miller and Davidson, arrived. Miller, the senior of the two, was a thick-set man with a perpetually skeptical expression. Davidson was younger, his face still holding a degree of earnestness that hadn't yet been eroded by the daily grind. Karen rushed towards them, a torrent of accusations pouring out. "Officers, thank God you're here, this man, Malik Johnson. He's barricaded his pool. He's causing a disturbance, yelling, threatening. My grandchildren are terrified." Malik raised an eyebrow. Yelling, threatening, his voice hadn't risen above a conversational level. Her grandchildren, as far as he knew, weren't even here yet. Officer Miller's gaze settled on Malik, and it was a look Malik had seen countless times before, a look that assessed, judged, and often condemned, before a single word of his side was heard. "Sir," Miller began, his hand resting on his holstered weapon, a subtle but clear show of authority. "We've had a complaint about a disturbance, and that you're denying access to a community facility. This is a private pool." "Officer, on my property," Malik stated clearly, holding his ground. "It is not a community facility. It's closed for emergency maintenance because the filtration system is malfunctioning." He gestured towards the silent. "Still water. I'm waiting for a technician to arrive." Karen, emboldened by the officer's presence, chimed in. "He's lying. He does this all the time. He thinks he's better than us." Officer Davidson looked from Karen to Malik, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Officer Miller, however, seemed to have already made up his mind. "Ma'am, if it's his private pool, he has the right to close it." This was a perfunctory nod to the law, but his tone suggested he was merely humoring Malik. "But it's an eyesore when it's closed," Karen sputtered, grasping for a new angle. And the noise he was making earlier, tinkering with it. That was the disturbance. Malik almost laughed. The quiet hum of a pool pump versus her screeching of, "Sir." "Were you making excessive noise?" Miller asked, his focus back on Malik. "No, officer. I was inspecting my pool equipment. The only excessive noise this morning has been from Mrs. Wilkins." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Look, folks, it's Saturday morning. People want to relax. Can't we all just get along?" It was the classic dismissal, the attempt to reduce a clear instance of harassment and racial bias into a simple neighborhood squabble. "I am trying to relax, in my own home." "Officer," Malik said, his patience wearing thin, "Mrs. Wilkins is the one trespassing on my property line, making false accusations, and, frankly, harassing me." "Harassing," Karen shrieked again. "I am the victim here." Just then, a van from Aquatech Pool Services pulled up to the curb. A young man in a blue uniform hopped out, carrying a toolkit. "Mr. Johnson called about a filtration issue." Malik nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. Right this way." He turned to the officers. "As you can see, I was telling the truth. The pool requires service." Officer Miller looked slightly deflated, his narrative of an aggressive black man causing trouble for his white neighbor beginning to crumble. Officer Davidson, however, seemed relieved to have a logical explanation. All right, Miller grumbled. Looks like it's a civil matter then. Or rather, no matter at all if the pool's just being fixed. He gave Karen a stern look. Ma'am, please allow Mr. Johnson to have his pool serviced, and try to keep the noise down. Everyone! Karen looked aghast, as if the officers had betrayed her. But he's still being unreasonable. The technician, a young man named Leo, followed Malik towards the pool equipment, casting a curious glance at Karen in the police car. Malik ignored Karen's continued muttering. He needed to get to the bottom of the strange sounds. It wasn't just about the inconvenience. A genuine unease had settled in him since last night. As Leo opened the main filter housing, Malik explained the gurgling noise he'd heard coming from the drain at the deep end. It was like something was caught in there, or pushing up from below. Intermittent, but definitely not normal. Leo listened intently, nodding. Could be a collapsed pipe or a major blockage. With the system off, the pressure changes. If there's something buoyant, it might try to surface. Let me check the main drain access first. Sometimes debris gets sucked in pretty hard. He moved to the edge of the deep end, peering down into the still, clear water. The main drain cover was a large, circular grate, even from the edge. Nothing looked obviously amiss on the surface of the grate itself. The gathered neighbors, who had been watching the police interaction with avid interest, hadn't dispersed. They were now observing the pool technician with the same rapt attention. It was clear that Malik's closed pool had become the morning's prime entertainment. Leo frowned. The water's pretty clear, but it's hard to see directly into the sump. Given what you described, and since the system's already drained down a bit from being off, I might need to get a closer look. Maybe even send a small camera down if I can't see anything obvious. He decided to start by trying to manually clear around the drain. He fetched a long pool pole with a net and a brush, attempting to probe the area. As he did, a small, dark object, no bigger than a child's toy, dislodged from near the edge of the drain cover and slowly floated upwards. It was a waterlogged, tattered piece of fabric, almost black with age and grime. Malik leaned closer as Leo fished it out. It was unidentifiable. Just a scrap. Doesn't look like much, Leo commented. But if that got sucked in, larger things could too. He continued to probe. Then, his pole hit something solid, something that wasn't part of the drain assembly. He tried to nudge it. It didn't budge. There's definitely something down there. Mr. Johnson, Leo said, his voice tinged with curiosity. It feels metallic and larger than that piece of cloth. Too large to have gone through the grate. It feels like it's through the grate, or the grate is sitting on it. A new kind of tension filled the air, replacing the earlier animosity with a sense of intrigue. Even Karen Wilkins, still fuming by the gate, seemed momentarily silenced by this unexpected development. What lay beneath the placid surface of Malik Johnson's pool was suddenly a much more interesting question than who got to swim in it. The strange sounds had been a prelude to something far more unusual. Leo straightened up, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, despite the morning still being relatively cool. Mr. Johnson, I can't be sure what it is from here, but it's definitely solid, and it feels like it's wedged in tight, or the drain cover is somehow resting on it. The grate itself is bolted down, so it's not something that could have just floated under easily unless it was there before the grate was last secured. Malik frowned. He'd had the pool resurfaced and the drain covers upgraded 3 years ago when he bought the house. So, it could have been there for at least that long or longer, Leo affirmed, if it's been submerged for years, especially if it's metallic. It could be corroded, heavy. My tools aren't really designed for excavation. He gave a wry smile. Usually, I'm just scooping out leaves and the occasional pool toy. Karen Wilkins, who had been momentarily stunned into silence, found her voice again, her suspicion latching onto this new development like a heat-seeking missile. What is it? What have you got down there? Johnson, more of your secrets, she addressed the officers. who had taken the few steps closer. Their earlier nonchalance replaced by a professional curiosity. "See, officers, I told you something was wrong here. He's probably hiding something." Officer Miller shot her an irritated glance. "Ma'am, let the technician work." "We don't know what it is yet," but his eyes were now fixed on the deep end of the pool with a new intensity. A simple maintenance issue was one thing. An unidentifiable, potentially large metallic object purposefully concealed or long lost at the bottom of a pool was another. Malik felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was escalating in a way he hadn't anticipated. First, the racist accusations. Now the insinuation that he was involved in something illicit connected to this mysterious object. The dream of a peaceful Saturday morning, she had not just evaporated, it was being systematically dismantled. His sanctuary was rapidly becoming a spectacle, and potentially a scene of unwelcome investigation. "Leo," Malik said, his voice firm, trying to project control he didn't entirely feel. "What's the safest way to identify it and, if necessary, remove it? I want this handled properly." Leo considered. "Well, the standard procedure for a compromised main drain, especially with an unknown obstruction, would be to partially drain the pool to get a clearer look and better access. But if this thing is heavy or wedged, even with the water lowered, I might not have the leverage or equipment to pull it out without damaging the drain housing or the pool shell. Given that it feels metallic and has been down there a while, it could be anything from an old piece of discarded equipment to, well, something else entirely." The unspoken possibilities hung in the air. Officer Davidson, the younger cop, spoke up, addressing Miller but looking at Malik. "If it's something suspicious, maybe we should hold off until we know what we're dealing with." Miller grunted. "It's still on private property. For now, it's Mr. Johnson's call how he wants to retrieve it. Unless it starts looking like a crime scene." He looked at Malik. "But I'd advise caution, sir. You don't want to disturb something that could be evidence of, well, anything." Malik understood the veiled warning. The joy of home ownership in Viridian Palms was, for him, perpetually tinged with the knowledge that any misstep, any unusual circumstance, could be magnified and scrutinized through a lens of suspicion. "I appreciate the advice." Officer Malik said, "Leo, what do you recommend? Do you need to call in someone with more specialized equipment? I think that would be the best course of action." "Mr. Johnson," Leo admitted, "especially if we want to minimize any damage to your pool. I know a company that does underwater recovery and inspection. They have divers and lifting gear for exactly this kind of situation. They can go down, assess it visually, and then determine the best way to bring it up. It's better than me just yanking at it blindly." "A diver?" Karen scoffed from the gate, her voice dripping with disdain. "How theatrical." "What's next? A submarine? Just to avoid having your precious pool used by the community?" Malik ignored her. The idea of a diver descending into his pool felt surreal. But Leo's reasoning was sound. He wanted this object out, and he wanted it out safely and professionally. The strange gurgling sounds, the tattered piece of fabric, the solid thud of metal. It all pointed to something that didn't belong, something that had been disturbed and was now making its presence known. "Okay, Leo, please make the call," Malik instructed. "I want this resolved as soon as possible." As Leo stepped away to phone the diving service, the nod of neighbors on the sidewalk seemed to swell. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Henderson was now fully on her porch, her polite wave from earlier forgotten, replaced by an expression of avid fascination. Mr. Davies had been joined by his wife, and even a few teenagers on bikes had paused, drawn by the unusual sight of police cars and the palpable sense of unfolding drama at the Johnson residence. Malik felt like an exhibit in his own zoo. His meticulously curated life, his hard-won privacy, were being stripped away, layer by layer, under the curious and, in some cases, hostile gaze of his neighbors. He thought of the countless hours he'd poured into his business, the sacrifices he'd made, all to build a life of security and comfort. And yet, here he was, on his own property, feeling exposed and embattled. Officer Miller approached him again, his tone more measured now. "Mr. Johnson, while we wait, do you have any idea what this could be? Any knowledge of previous owners hiding things? Anything like that?" Malik shook his head. "None at all. I bought the house from an elderly couple who were downsizing. The Pattersons. They seemed like very straightforward people. Before them, I believe the house was owned by the original developer of this cul-de-sac. That's going back a couple of decades at least. He'd done his due diligence when buying the property. Of course, but that had focused on structural integrity and clear title, not buried secrets in the swimming pool. The Pattersons. You say Mrs. Henderson called out from her porch, her voice surprisingly clear across the manicured lawns. Oh, they were a quiet pair, kept to themselves mostly, but there was some unpleasantness before them. If I recall, long time ago. Of course, a new ripple of interest went through the crowd. Malik looked at Mrs. Henderson, a woman he'd only exchanged pleasantries with. Unpleasantness. Mrs. Henderson fanned herself with a piece of mail. Oh, disputes, arguments. Someone moved out rather suddenly. I think it was all very hushed up. Before the Pattersons, there was a different family. I can't quite recall the name. It caused quite a stir at the time, though Karen Wilkins seized on this immediately. Aha. So, it's not his doing directly. Perhaps, but he's bought a house with a dark past, probably got it cheap because of it. Malik shot her a withering glare. The house had been anything but cheap. Officer Miller frowned, looking from Mrs. Henderson to Malik. Ma'am, if you have any specific information. Oh, heavens no, officer, Mrs. Henderson said quickly, suddenly looking less confident under his direct gaze. Just old neighborhood gossip. Probably means nothing at all. But the seed of intrigue had been planted. A house with a dark past. An object hidden in the pool. Leo returned, his phone call completed. Okay, Mr. Johnson, good news and bad news. The good news is, Deep Dive Recovery can have a diver here within the hour. They're based relatively close. The bad news is, they charge a premium for emergency weekend callouts. Money is no object if he's hiding treasure. Karen jeered. Malik ignored her. That's fine, Leo. Get them here. He just wanted this over with. Whatever was down there. He wanted it brought into the light. The strange sounds, the unsettling feeling he'd had. It was no longer just about a malfunctioning filter. It felt like his pool was trying to give up a secret. One that had been held for far too long. The wait for the diver felt interminable. The police officers, Miller and Davidson, decided to remain, citing the unusual circumstances and the need to keep the peace. Though Malik suspected they were as curious as everyone else, Karen Wilkins remained at her post by the gate, a self-appointed sentinel of suspicion, occasionally muttering to anyone who would listen, or even those who wouldn't. Malik paced his patio, the stone cool beneath his bare feet despite the rising sun. He was acutely aware of the eyes on him, his neighbors, the police, even Leo, who now looked at the pool with a mixture of professional concern and undisguised curiosity. The weight of their collective gaze was heavy. He had always strived to be a model citizen, a successful entrepreneur who just happened to be black in a predominantly white space. He had never wanted to be the center of neighborhood drama, the subject of gossip and speculation. Yet, here he was. The sounds from the deep end had been a summons, and whatever lay beneath the water was about to answer. The twist wasn't just that there was an object, it was that its discovery was turning his carefully constructed world upside down, forcing him to confront not just a mechanical issue, but potentially a piece of a forgotten, perhaps sinister, local history that was now, quite literally, surfacing in his backyard. And he had a sinking feeling that Karen Wilkins would find a way to make it his fault. No matter what emerged, the arrival of the Deep Dive Recovery van, a much larger vehicle than Leo's, was an event in itself. It rumbled to a stop behind the police cruisers, and a man built like a compact refrigerator, all solid muscle and calm competence. emerged. He introduced himself as Marcus, his handshake firm, his eyes assessing the situation with a practiced glance that took in Malik, the officers, the gawking neighbors, and the silent, waiting pool. Marcus listened intently as Malik and Leo explained the situation, nodding occasionally. He asked a few pertinent questions about the pool's depth, construction, and the feel of the object when Leo had probed it. Unlike the initial flurry of accusations and defensiveness, Marcus's presence brought a new, more professional kind of tension to the scene, the quiet focus of a specialist about to undertake a delicate operation. "All right," Marcus said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the remaining murmurs from the onlookers. "Sounds like we needed to get an eyes on it first. I'll go down, take a look, and then we'll decide on the best extraction method. Could be simple, could be tricky." He began to unload his gear: scuba tanks, a wetsuit, a heavy-duty harness, lights, and a waterproof camera rig. Each piece of equipment seemed to underscore the seriousness of the situation. This was no longer just about a clogged drain, it was an underwater investigation. Karen Wilkins, who had been temporarily subdued by the technical nature of the conversation, couldn't resist a snide comment. "All this fuss for a bit of old junk, and he's probably just trying to inflate his insurance claim for a new pool." Malik didn't even bother to look her way. His attention was fixed on Marcus, who was methodically preparing for the dive. Officer Miller and Officer Davidson watched with a mixture of official duty and personal intrigue. The crowd of neighbors had grown slightly larger, drawn by the novelty. It wasn't every day a diver went into a residential swimming pool in Viridian Palms, once suited up, looking like a figure from an entirely different, more adventurous world. Marcus sat on the edge of the pool. He double-checked his gauges, adjusted his mask, and then, with a practiced roll, slipped into the water with barely a splash. The only sound was the hiss of his regulator as he submerged, his powerful underwater light cutting a swathe through the turquoise clarity. All eyes were on the bubbles that marked his progress towards the deep end, the surface of the pool, which had seemed so placid just an hour ago, now held a palpable mystery. Malik found himself holding his breath, an absurd reaction, yet one he couldn't control. What secrets did his pool hold, and how would they affect him? Minutes stretched, each one feeling like an eternity. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic, the chirping of birds, and Karen's occasional, impatient sighs. Leo stood beside Malik, his earlier anxiety replaced by a technician's fascination. Then, Marcus's head broke the surface near the main drain. He pulled off his mask, treading water. "Well, Mr. Johnson," he called out, his voice slightly muffled by the surrounding water. "You've definitely got something down there. It's a safe, an old one by the looks of it, smallish, but heavy, maybe 2 foot square, 18 inches deep. It's wedged pretty good against the drain's sump, and the grate is partially resting on it. Looks like it's been there a very long time. It's heavily corroded." A collective gasp went through the onlookers. A safe Karen's eyes widened, a strange mixture of triumph and avarice flashing across her face. A safe, I knew it, treasure. "He's been hiding treasure. Officers?" Officer Miller held up a hand to silence her, though his own expression was now one of heightened interest. "A safe. You say he called to Marcus. Any idea how it got there?" Marcus shook his head. "No way to tell from just looking. But it wasn't dropped in casually. It settled deep. The suction from the drain over the years might have pulled it in tighter. It's going to take some careful work to get it out without damaging your pool floor or the drain assembly." "Mr. Johnson, can you lift it?" Malik asked, his mind racing. A safe? What on earth was a safe doing at the bottom of his pool? "And whose was it? I think so," Marcus replied. "I'll use lift bags. It's the gentlest way for something like this. I'll need to secure them to the safe, then slowly inflate them. It'll bring it up nice and easy, but it'll take a little time to rig it." He submerged again, and the waiting resumed. This time, however, the anticipation was electric. A safe, the word itself conjured images of hidden fortunes, lost secrets, forgotten crimes. The neighbors were now openly speculating. their voices buzzing. Mrs. Henderson was recounting, with renewed vigor, her vague memories of past unpleasantness at the house. Malik felt a growing unease. If this safe contained something valuable, or worse, something incriminating, what were the implications for him? He was the current owner of the property where it was found. He could only imagine the headlines, the suspicion, the way Karen would twist this to fit her narrative of him as an outsider. A troublemaker, after what felt like another age. Marcus surfaced again. Okay, it's rigged. I'm going to start the lift. It'll come up slowly. Best if everyone stands clear of the edge. Just in case. He positioned himself, and soon, a stream of bubbles indicated the lift bags were inflating. The surface of the water above the main drain began to bulge slightly. Then, with agonizing slowness, a dark barnacle-encrusted shape began to rise from the depths. It was undeniably a safe, its metal surfaces pitted and stained, clumps of algae and unidentifiable aquatic growth clinging to it. As it broke the surface, suspended by the bright yellow lift bags, it looked like some ancient, waterlogged chest from a pirate story. Water streamed from it, carrying with it the smell of stagnant muck and old metal. Marcus, with Leo's help, carefully guided the buoyant safe toward the shallow end, then with considerable effort, manhandled it onto the pool deck, where it landed with a dull, heavy thud. It sat there, incongruous and ominous, on the pristine tiles beside Malik's sparkling pool. The crowd pressed closer, their curiosity overcoming any pretense of casual observation. Karen Wilkins was practically vibrating with excitement. Open it now, she demanded, pushing past Officer Davidson, who tried to maintain a clear space. It's probably full of gold. Or maybe evidence. Her eyes flicked towards Malik. Officer Miller stepped forward, his official demeanor firmly back in place. All right, hold on, everyone. Mr. Johnson, this was found on your property. Technically, its contents are your concern, unless it contains something clearly illegal or related to a crime. He looked at the safe. That thing looks like it's been down there for decades. It's probably rusted shut. Indeed, the safe was a sorry sight. The hinges were barely discernible under layers of corrosion. And the dial, if there ever was one, was completely obscured. There was no obvious handle. We need a locksmith or a crowbar, Karen insisted, her voice shrill. Malik looked at the safe, then at the expectant faces around him. His initial shock was giving way to a grim determination. He wanted to know what was inside, not for treasure, but for answers, for an end to the speculation that was now running rampant. Marcus, Malik said, do you have anything that could help open this, or should I call a locksmith? Marcus examined the safe more closely, tapping it in a few places, given the corrosion. A locksmith might struggle, and forcing it with a crowbar could damage whatever's inside. Sometimes, with these old ones, if the seals have failed and water's gotten in, the contents are ruined anyway. But if it was reasonably watertight, who knows? He paused. I have some heavy-duty cutting tools on the van for salvage work. Not subtle, but they'd get it open. Then let's do it, Malik said decisively. He glanced at Officer Miller. Any objections? Officer Miller considered, as long as you're aware, sir, that if the contents indicate a crime, this becomes an active investigation, and anything you find will be evidence. Understood, Malik replied. He just wanted this resolved. Marcus retrieved a heavy-duty angle grinder and some pry bars from his van. The neighbors watched, hushed now, as he prepared to assault the old safe. The whine of the grinder as it bit into the rusted metal was piercing, sending sparks flying. It was a brutal, noisy process, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban morning it had once been. After several minutes of intense effort, focusing on the corroded door seams, Marcus switched to a large pry bar. He inserted it into a gap he'd created, and with a grunt of exertion, put his weight into it. There was a screech of tortured metal, a groan, and then, with a final, reluctant pop, the safe door creaked open a few inches. a musty, earthy smell, the scent of damp paper and decay, wafted out, even overpowering the metallic tang of the grinding. Marcus carefully pulled the door further open. Everyone leaned in, necks craning. The interior was tightly packed. There were no stacks of gold bars, no glittering jewels, much to Karen's visible disappointment. Instead, there were bundles of papers, seemingly wrapped in oilcloth or some other waterproofing material that had partially degraded, several old photo albums with warped covers, and, nestled in the center, a small, unassuming metal film canister, the kind used for old 8mm or 16mm movie reels. Malik, his heart pounding, reached in carefully and lifted out one of the bundles of papers. The oilcloth was slimy and brittle in places, but seemed to have offered some protection. He then picked up the film canister. It felt surprisingly heavy for its size. Officer Miller stepped closer. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps you should let us handle those items for now." But Malik was already carefully unwrapping the oilcloth from the top bundle. Inside, remarkably preserved despite the years underwater, were legal documents, deeds, old letters, financial statements. He scanned a name on one of the deeds, Arthur Carmichael. The name meant nothing to him. Then his eyes fell on a smaller, separate envelope within the bundle. It was addressed in faded ink to the authorities, or whomever it may concern. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink blurred in places but still legible. He began to read aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt internally. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have been realized, and Karen Wilkins has succeeded in her campaign of terror against me. Arthur Carmichael, the rightful owner of 3 Viridian Palm Drive." A stunned silence fell over the gathered crowd. Every eye swiveled to Karen Wilkins. Her face, which had been alight with greedy anticipation, had gone deathly pale. Her jaw was slack. Malik continued reading, his voice gaining strength. "She has been systematically trying to drive me from my home, to acquire my property through deceit and intimidation. She has poisoned my pets, vandalized my garden, spread vicious rumors. I have documented her actions, her threats. I fear for my safety. I have placed this letter, along with other evidence, including photographs and a film reel documenting one of her more egregious acts of harassment and attempted coercion, in this safe, hoping that one day the truth will come out. She wants this house. She will stop at nothing." Malik looked up from the letter, his gaze locking with Karen's. Arthur Carmichael. He was the owner before the Pattersons, wasn't he? "Mrs. Henderson," he asked, though he already knew the answer. Mrs. Henderson, looking shocked, nodded slowly. Yes, I believe that was the name. He left very suddenly. We all thought he just moved away." Malik then picked up one of the photo albums. He opened it carefully. The pages were stuck together in places, but he managed to separate one. It showed a younger Karen Wilkins, unmistakably her despite the passage of perhaps 25 or 30 years, standing on what looked like this very property, screaming at a man whose back was mostly to the camera, but who appeared distressed. Another photo showed what looked like deliberately damaged rose bushes, identical to the heritage roses Malik had tried to save when he first moved in. Then, Malik held up the small metal film canister. "And I believe this," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Is the film reel mentioned in Mr. Carmichael's letter?" Karen Wilkins finally found her voice. A strangled gasp. "Lies, it's all lies. Forgeries, he put them there. Johnson put them there to frame me." Her eyes darted around wildly, looking for support, but finding only stunned, accusing faces. Even Officer Miller and Officer Davidson were looking at her with expressions that had shifted from professional interest to grim suspicion. The power dynamic on the pristine patio of Malik Johnson's home had just undergone a seismic shift. The accuser had become the accused. Her long-held facade of neighborhood respectability crumbling under the weight of evidence dredged from the murky depths of a forgotten safe. The strange sounds from the pool hadn't just been a malfunction. They had been the precursor to a decades-old truth clawing its way to the surface. Karen Wilkins's desperate cry of frame-up echoed hollowly across the stunned silence of Malik's patio. Her face, moments before flushed with anticipated triumph and then pale with shock, was now contorted in a mask of panicked denial. Her eyes, wide-eyed and darting, scanned the assembled faces, the neighbors who had once been her audience and her allies, the police officers whose initial deference had evaporated, and Malik, who stood holding the damning letter, his expression one of grim vindication. You can't believe this. This criminal? Karen shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Malik. He planted it all. He's trying to destroy me because I stand up for this community, because I'm not afraid of him. Officer Miller, his face now a study in stern professionalism, took a step towards Karen. Mrs. Wilkins, I suggest you calm down. These are serious allegations, and this is potential evidence in a very old case. We will need to investigate this thoroughly. Investigate him, Karen shrieked back, her voice cracking. He's the one who should be investigated. He probably dug that rusty old thing up from a junkyard and filled it with those lies. But her bluster was failing her. The weight of the physical evidence, the corroded safe clearly pulled from the pool's depths, the aged documents, the faded ink, the vintage film canister, was too substantial to be dismissed as a hastily concocted fabrication. Even the most ardent of her former supporters among the neighbors were now looking at her with expressions ranging from doubt to dawning horror. Ma'am, we saw the safe being pulled from the pool, Officer Davidson stated, his voice calm but firm. The technician can attest to where it was found. These items appear to have been submerged for a very long time. He gestured towards the murky water still puddled around the safe. Mr. Johnson, we will need to take all of these items into evidence. The letter, the documents, the photographs, and especially that film canister. Malik nodded, carefully placing the letter and the album back beside the safe. Of course, officer, I want the truth to come out. Whatever it is. He felt a profound weariness, but beneath it, a current of grim satisfaction. The constant, gnawing injustice he'd felt from Karen's campaign against him was finally being met with a truth far more damning than he could have ever engineered. Marcus, the diver, who had been quietly observing the dramatic turn of events, spoke up. The condition of that safe, the level of corrosion, the way it was settled into the pool bottom, it's consistent with being submerged for at least 2 to 3 decades. Maybe more. No way it was planted recently. His expert opinion hung in the air, another nail in the coffin of Karen's credibility. Mendon Henderson, who had earlier provided the crucial link to Arthur Carmichael's name, now looked deeply shaken. Arthur. He always said Karen was making his life miserable. We didn't really believe him. We thought he was just being eccentric. Oh dear. Her voice was filled with a dawning, horrified guilt. Other neighbors murmured amongst themselves, their expressions reflecting a similar discomfort as they reevaluated past assumptions. Officer Miller directed Officer Davidson to begin carefully cataloging and bagging the contents of the safe. He then turned to Karen Wilkins. Ms. Wilkins, given the nature of these allegations and the potential evidence, I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Questions, you're treating me like a criminal. Karen's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. I am the victim. Here, he threatened me. He's trying to steal my reputation, ma'am. You are not under arrest at this time, Officer Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But these are serious allegations emerging from evidence found right here. We have a duty to investigate. You can either come voluntarily, or I can compel you to. Karen looked around, her eyes wild, seeking an escape, an ally, but finding none. The faces surrounding her were cold, accusing. Her reign of petty tyranny in Viridian Palms, built on a foundation of prejudice and entitlement, was crumbling before her very eyes. Defeated. Her shoulders slumped, The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a dazed, uncomprehending fear. I I need my lawyer, she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper, as Officer Davidson carefully placed the film canister into an evidence bag. Malik felt a strange sense of detachment. He had been the target of Karen's venom for so long, and now, the source of her malice, her own past actions, were being laid bare. It was a vindication. Yes, but it was also a stark reminder of the ugliness that could hide beneath a veneer of suburban respectability. The police spent another hour on the scene, taking detailed statements from Malik, Leo, and Marcus. Mrs. Henderson and a few other longtime residents also offered what little they remembered about Arthur Carmichael's departure and Karen's behavior around that time. The film canister, holding the promise of visual proof, became the focal point of the nascent investigation. Later that afternoon, Detective Washington, a seasoned investigator from the local police department, contacted Malik. He informed him that they had arranged to view the film reel. Mr. Johnson, the detective said, his voice grave, the footage on this reel is compelling. It clearly shows a woman we strongly believe to be a younger Karen Wilkins, on the property now belonging to you, engaged in acts of vandalism and what appears to be a very aggressive, threatening confrontation with a man we presume to be Arthur Carmichael. She's also seen attempting to force him to sign some documents. The audio is patchy, but her voice and her words are incriminating. The detective explained that the film, combined with the letter and other documents, painted a clear picture of a sustained campaign of harassment and intimidation aimed at forcing Carmichael off his property. Likely so, Karen or someone connected to her could acquire it cheaply. Carmichael's sudden disappearance years ago, once dismissed as him simply moving on, now took on a far more sinister connotation. While there was no immediate evidence of foul play leading to his death directly from the safe's contents, the evidence of her criminal harassment and potential fraud, Joe, was overwhelming. The news spread through Viridian Palms like wildfire. Karen Wilkins, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, the one so quick to cast aspersions on Malik, was now the subject of a serious criminal investigation. Her carefully constructed world collapsed. She was formally arrested later that week, charged with multiple counts of harassment, witness intimidation based on the threats documented by Carmichael, an investigation into potential property fraud. The story made the local news, albeit with names initially withheld pending arraignment, but everyone in Viridian Palms knew in the days that followed. Malik noticed a distinct shift in the neighborhood. Some neighbors, those who had always been polite but distant, now offered genuine smiles and nods of support. A few, including Mrs. Henderson, approached him directly to apologize for their past assumptions and for not taking Arthur Carmichael's complaints seriously decades ago. The collective guilt of the community for having enabled or ignored Karen's behavior for so long was palpable. Malik received a beautifully arranged fruit basket with a card signed by several families on his street, expressing their regret for what he had endured and their appreciation for his quiet strength. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. The cloud of suspicion that had hovered over him simply because of his race and his success began to dissipate, replaced by a grudging, and in some cases, genuine respect. Leo, the pool technician, returned a few days later to properly service the filtration system. Now that the obstruction had been removed, as he worked, he shook his head. Craziest service I've ever had. Mr. Johnson, glad it worked out for you. Though, in a way. Malik watched as the pool water, now clear and sparkling under the California sun, circulated freely. The eerie gurgling sounds from the drain silenced for good. The pool, which had been the catalyst for so much turmoil, finally felt like his own again. More than that, it felt cleansed, as if the unearthing of the safe had not just revealed a past crime, but had also purged a lingering poison from the property. Karen Wilkins's legal battles were just beginning, but her social standing in Viridian Palms was irrevocably destroyed. Her house went up for sale a few months later. The Open This Pool Now shriek that had once symbolized her entitled aggression now seemed like a pathetic footnote to a story of long-delayed justice. Malik Johnson stood on his patio, looking out at his pristine pool. The ordeal had been invasive, infuriating, and deeply unsettling, but it had also brought a strange kind of peace. The truth, buried for decades, had surfaced in the most unexpected of ways, not only bringing a wrongdoer to account, but also subtly reshaping the community around him. He had not sought to be a catalyst for such change, but he had faced the challenge with dignity and resolve. His home, his sanctuary, felt more secure than ever, not because of the gates or the alarm system, but because a hidden truth had been brought into the light, and in its wake, a measure of understanding and respect had finally begun to bloom in the carefully manicured lawns of Viridian Palms. The fight he hadn't asked for was over, and Malik Johnson could finally, truly, enjoy the fruits of his labor in peace.